I was born 17 years ago. For the past 6 months, I've been in my basement playing Skyrim. But for all those hours, I've never understood what the hell has been going on. I scoured the internet, searching for wikis, to find even the most obscure events in the Elder Scrolls. Behold, sunlight now enters my room. These are the early hours of the morning, and my few moments of free time. Fueled by obscene amounts of caffeine, I search for the events of the Elder Scrolls lore.
The province most likely added after Hammerfell was Black Marsh, also called Argonia sometimes. The main reason we suspect this is from dialogue with NPCs in the game Redguard. The decision to add Black Marsh to the Empire was pretty controversial. Even the Pocket Guide to the Empire states this. So, 3rd edition, quote, Tiber Septim, it was said, thought twice before conquering Black Marsh for his new empire. This is probably because of tough geography and the Argonian proficiency in guerrilla warfare. Keep in mind, we're only a couple hundred years past the Nahaten flu at this point, which I've sometimes pronounced as the Kanahaten flu. The Argonians are not taken lightly, but he still took a shot. Again, quoting the Pocket Guide to the Empire, the borders of the province fell easily to his forces, but he wisely decided to avoid strategically unimportant inner swamps, and thus met with little resistance. So I personally take this to mean he made a deal with some local nobles, probably promising them greater political influence and wealth, and marched his legions into main cities and key fortifications, sticking straightly to the main roads the whole time. So, the province was most likely assimilated with little to no blood. This also left the province with a high degree of autonomy, because only key roads and high population centers are under Imperial control. The swamps are just left to their own devices, so yeah, go the Argonians living in that. It probably has a lot more to do with Tiber Septim just not wanting to spend the time and money conquering a bunch of swamps that just aren't worth it. Who knows, he might have been able to do it if he tried, but then again, the situation in Hammerfell shows that the man does have his limits. The next province added to the Empire, we think, is Elsweyr. It was possibly allied with the first Eldmeri Dominion. If you recall the Elder Scrolls Online, they're actually one of the races aligned with it, so it would make sense that there's still some mutual amity there. This whole alliance thing may have been a pretext that Tiber used to invade, but we don't really have the details, and that's just my speculation. It was most likely assimilated, and most cities surrendered, but there is evidence of at least a few skirmishes breaking out between Khajiit forces and the legions. This probably happened when the legions first crossed into Elsweyr, or perhaps they got harassed by guerrilla forces as they were marching across the province. We do have at least one major battle though. The Khajiit in Sankal refused to surrender. General Potrade, leading commander of Tiber Septims, ordered the 3rd Legion to attack the city with full force, due to extremely high civilian casualties, including children, the battle was omitted from official Imperial history. That battle aside, the rest of the province most likely submitted. Since Khajiit traditions were preserved, and the Main, you'll recall that elder figure, remained intact, it's most likely a treaty similar to the armistice that would be signed with Morrowind. We don't actually have any mention of Tiber Septim in this, so who knows, maybe he was off conquering another province while this was taking place. It looks like it was under subordinate commanders, but who knows, he could have been there. At any rate, this is where the Imperial Library places it, and it's where I will place it as well. With the realms of Men and Beast now conquered, Tiber Septim looked over to the realms of Myr, so the first one up on the block was Morrowind. Extensive preparations were made, but his generals were still extremely pessimistic about the Empire's chances of actually successfully invading and subduing the province. This was due to a number of factors. Tough terrain, like really tough terrain, the tribunal, despite waning central authority, it was still nothing to sneeze at, and their belief that the Dunmer were religious fanatics. They also expected a prolonged conflict in which their forces would get pinned down, and perhaps the Empire would even break apart, with a potential military quagmire, or the First Eldmeri Dominion might even take advantage of them. With all these factors, why would you even attempt to invade this place? Well, going back to that whole heretical Orthodox thing, we actually have a number of reasons. So let's start off with the heretical reason. Under King Ysmir, one of Hjalti's top advisors, and by Hjalti, I of course mean Talos, Tiber Septim, again it's the same thing. So he had been prodding Tiber to invade for years. Why? Because him and a bunch of his other Nord buddies had suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of the Tribunal many, many years back, so he wanted revenge. The Orthodox version, and this really does go for the, you could say this for the heretical version too, but it is far more practical. Tiber and the Empire were flat broke after all of the wars, and Morrowind had massive ebony deposits that would instantly alleviate all of the Empire's financial troubles. Also, it was the home to the key that would eventually enable the Empire to conquer the First Eldmeri Dominion. It is, of course, the Numidium, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry, we'll be going into it in detail very shortly. Despite the general's concerns, Tiber was completely undeterred, despite all of the reasons to be concerned about invading Morrowind, because he was able to recognize its one key weakness: chronic infighting amongst the great houses. While there might be tough terrain, and the Dunmer might be great warriors, they're also constantly at each other's throats, so that gives him a massive leg up. The legions most likely invade in what I'm guessing to be sort of a three-pronged assault: Skyrim, Cyrodiil, and Blackmarsh. Well, that's one school of thought anyways, but they could also just invade in kind of one big force. That might make sense if you don't want the various Dunmer, like, if they aren't aligned, you'd think you might want to just pick them off one by one, similar to the strategy most likely used in High Rock, but we really don't know. Judging that the only battle we know of is at Mournhold, it would appear that they kind of invaded up from Skyrim. So, one major battle and a couple skirmishes is all we have. The skirmishes most likely refer to guerrilla forces offering only token resistance. So that one major battle is the Sack of Mournhold. During it, the city was completely razed to the ground, and the royal family was wiped out. And by that, we of course mean killed. Dead. Except for the 5-year-old heiress Baranzea, who will later on become the High Queen of Morrowind. This was cruel, yes, along with the sack of St. Call back in Elsweyr, but it provided really good motivation for no further resistance against Imperial rule. Well, the invasion is going on, but presumably right after the events at Mournhold, secret negotiations are opened up between Tiber Septim and Vivek, the God King of the Tribunal. This resulted in a peace treaty called the Armistice. It was really a win-win. It was culturally very favorable to Morrowind. Freedom of religion, which was very important because the Dunmer worship a variety of Daedra instead of the Imperial Pantheon, and the ancient Dunmeri right to trade and own slaves was preserved. The Empire got to garrison the province with troops, got access to the rich ebony mines, and most importantly, got the Numidium. One quick footnote, according to the heretical version, there was one person who wasn't super thrilled about the armistice. This was Ysmir, Hjalti's longtime advisor. He left Hjalti's side in a fit of rage for leaving the tribunal intact, because, you remember, the entire rationale for invading in the first place was so he could get revenge against them. Now, what is this Numidium that I've been saying so much about? Well, it is one of the more interesting parts in the lore, but it's complicated enough I'm just going to give you an extremely quick version of it. It's a giant golem, like Mechagodzilla-sized giant, that is also known as the Brass God, or the Brass Tower. It was built by the Dwemer, and was going to be powered by the Heart of Lorkhan. So, this is the thing that they're building, well, they disappear. To quote a letter received by the hero of Daggerfall, quote, Numidium was Tiber Septim's secret weapon in his bid for supreme power, 1,000-foot-tall automaton, a golem or atronach of sorts, powered by a gem called the Mantella. And yes, we will be getting into the Mantella just a bit later on as well. It's in various pieces around Morrowind, or it's transported in pieces, we don't really know, but it is moved over to the halls of the Colossus in Annexing Elsweyr. The halls of the Colossus themselves are kind of debated. Some say that they were constructed as soon as Rimmon was annexed. Others say that it was actually built to honor a race of giants, and others say that it was built by giants themselves. I'm gonna say there was probably some existing structure there, built by an ancient race of some sorts, and Tiber probably modified this existing structure to suit the Numidium as a type of testing grounds. Upon its completion, or its being upgraded, Tiber had it smuggled in pieces from Morrowind to the halls. So, again, we have two different sources, but they're pretty minute. Some say that it was actually assembled at the College of Imperial Battle Mages, but I'm kind of taking this to mean that it was actually assembled by the College of Imperial Battle Mages, not assembled at the College of Imperial Battle Mages. Construction was headed by the Imperial Battle Mage Zurin Arctus, who, as you recall, actually crowned Tiber Septim. So, this is all good, but there was one problem. The Numidium was designed to be powered by the Heart of Lorkhan, which, again, I don't want to get into, but it's an extremely powerful artifact. And it was unfortunately not available. Their solution is the Mantella, which is a massive green soul gem. So this is something that's actually created specifically for the Numidium. So we actually have three different versions of just how the Mantella came to exist. The first one is they make the soul gem, and then Tiber has the Imperial Guard kill Zurin and force the Battle Mage's life into the Mantella. He covered up this betrayal by claiming that Zurin was planning to assassinate him, and this process ends up turning Zurin himself into the Underking. The super orthodox version is the exact same as the first, except Zurin willingly gave his life force to power the Mantella, So, he wasn't betrayed, and there was no smoke and mirrors. And of course, we have the heretical version. In this one, Tiber tricked the Underking, so in this case Ysmir, who, as you recall, left his court in a huff because of him not taking revenge on the tribunal. So, Tiber sends him a message saying, "Hey, come to this meeting. I've come around on this whole killing the tribunal thing, and I now have the capabilities to actually do it. That's why I didn't kill them outright before, and now we are finally going to do things right." At the meeting, he had Zurin and the Imperial Guard ambush the Underking, and force his life force into Mentella. But the Underking did not go easily. During the scuffle, and by scuffle we basically mean a whole battle in between Zurin, Ysmir, and the Imperial Guard. So a bunch of dudes are killed, including many guards, Ysmir, and Zurin himself. But they're all packed into the Soul Gem. Not too sure about the other guards, but Ysmir for sure, and I think Zurin as well, and they kind of get combined or something. It's complicated. And it also states that the other versions were made up, especially the assassination part, because the troops dead, and the entire other two versions were made to cover this up. But regardless, they have Mentella powered, and the Numidium is now working. Before we get into the final showdown with the First Aldmeri Dominion, there is one more kind of, well, mysterious event. Well, it's not that mysterious, but I still feel that I need to cover it. This is the Battle of the Black Rocks in Second Era 863. We have a specific date, but trying to fit it in with the rest of the chronology is kind of difficult because there isn't really a place where it conveniently just falls in. So, the forces of the Aldmeri Dominion caught the Third Legion by surprise and almost completely destroyed it. The remnants of it made the core of the newly created Ruby Legion stationed in the Nibian Valley. So if I have my dates correctly, this is taking place during presumably the early years of the invasion of Hammerfell. With him being tied down there, it would make sense for there not really being a massive response to something like this right away. However, it would seem odd that he'd tackle Black Marsh, Elsweyr, and Morrowind before getting a bit of revenge, but again, the First Aldmeri Dominion was very powerful, and it could have been that he just couldn't react right away. But either way, it happened. So, moving on to the conquest of the First Aldmeri Dominion. It's easily the most powerful force in Tamriel other than the Empire at the time, and it owes this to a few things. The elves are actually just really good warriors and at magic. Also, the province of Valenwood could be just as harsh as Morrowind and even Black Marsh, especially if you're not very well acquainted with the area. Also, Wood Elves are excellent fighters. And perhaps the one unstoppable juggernaut is that the Somerset Isles has a navy that the Empire certainly cannot match. With all this, it doesn't look like the Empire can really throw that much at them. Except, oh wait, they have their secret weapon, the Numidium. So that's the one deciding factor they were probably waiting for the whole time. Details of this campaign are very sketchy, unfortunately, but we do know that it was pretty brief. I'm assuming Valenwood largely just surrendered once they got their first look at the Numidium. I'm assuming you'd probably send in ground forces to kind of secure a few forward bases, to at least make sure the Numidium doesn't get outflanked. But, again, who knows, it's so big you might just be able to march it across without even deploying any ground forces. So Valenwood is, of course, conquered. We don't know how. How exactly you'd get the Numidium across to the Somerset Isles, I'm not really sure. I'm assuming it's just big enough it can kind of walk across the sea on its own. You might be able to build transports for it, but if it's metal and that big, you need some pretty powerful transports, and if the elves have a really good navy, that wouldn't seem like a very good idea. There's always the possibility that you used an airship. We do know that the Dwemer and actually the Slode had those as well, but who knows, I'm just gonna say it, they walked it over, or who knows, they might have been able to teleport it. We do know that the Dwemer were actually very good at going through Plains of Oblivion, but either way, they get over there, and we have the surrender of Alinor in Second Era 896. So, Tiber's forces and the Numidium besiege the city of Alinor, the capital of the Somerset Isles, and it falls within an hour. The standard tactic, I'm guessing, for all this is that they basically just march this thing up, send some envoys in, and get terms of surrender. Partly because we don't have any sources on just how the Numidium's used. Again, with our lack of sources in general for this whole thing, it could mean just about anything, but really it doesn't seem that likely that you'd want to smash up a city you yourself are hoping to rule. But then again, we do have Sankal and Mournhold being sacked as well, so it's really anyone's guess. The most that we know is really that it happens. But personally, I'm leaning towards surrender. Well, the first Aldmeri Dominion is now entirely conquered, and for the first time in history, Tamriel is fully united. Tiber Septim would go on to rule for another 81 years, and bring Tamriel to the absolute height of its peace and prosperity. So, let's just take one last look over all of his accomplishments. Besides the whole building of the Third Empire, the Empire's official currency, the Septim, is derived from his name. He founded the Septim dynasty, which would rule Tamriel for the entire Third Era. He had a son with a woman whose name we do not have, unfortunately, and that son would go on to have a grandson called Pelagius. Now, some sources actually claim that Pelagius was just flat-out Tiber Septim's son, but that's most likely Imperial propaganda. Later in life, he would go on to have an affair with the future Dunmeri Queen Berenzea. However, things were not all quite so peachy keen. After winning the Tiber Wars, whoever was in the Mentella, so either Ysmir or Zernarktos, or possibly both, ended up trying to get out. And this ended up causing the Numidium to blow up, and its pieces were scattered all throughout Tamriel. So, from there we have the setup to the plotline of the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, but that's a story for another time. One last interesting fun fact I neglected to mention about the Numidium was it's actually controlled by a device called the Totem. So, with that being said, going back to Tiber Septim's legacy. His reign lasted from Second Era 854 to Third Era 38, and upon his death at 108, the oldest man in history, he left the throne to his grandson Pelagius Septim. He was buried in the catacombs of Sancretor, where the emperors of the Riemann dynasty were buried as well. As you recall, it was also the site of his greatest victory. So now we get to the most hotly debated aspect about him: godhood. As the story goes, upon his death, he ascended and retook the name Talos, becoming the god of war and governance. There's a lot of debate as to how and if this actually happened. He could have possibly done it by mantling Lorkhan, the trickster god who kind of... You know, I don't want to even really touch on Elder Scrolls metaphysics at the moment, especially after doing such a complicated episode, but basically, it's debatable, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So, I think I should probably end with this quote. Before the rule of Tiber Septim, all of Tamriel was in chaos. The poet Trezikis called that period of continuous unrest days and nights of blood and venom. The kings were a petty lot of grasping tyrants who fought Tiber's attempts to bring order to the land. But they were as disorganized as they were dissolute, and the strong hand of Septim brought peace forcibly to Tamriel. The year was Second Era 896. The following year, the Emperor declared the beginning of a new era. Thus began the Third Era. Year Aught.